This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey, I got a letter from Adam Band here. Check this out.
Oh, really?
Thomas, this election will be the last of its kind.
Thomas!
Can you help with the nudge? I know.
Come on! Preferred name in the fundraising database, people. He's a major donor.
It says Tom Ballard at the top too. So the address is Tom Ballard, and then the letter says
is it
Thomas.
like your electoral? It's probably a mail merge thing. This is really good content, by the way.
Can you help with an urgent gift of $130? Jesus Christ!
$130.
We're currently $1.2 million short to run big enough campaigns. Come on,
Jesus, fuck. Shit.
I don't have $1.3 million, guys. I'm sorry.
But do you have $130? That's the question.
Don't I give enough to these motherfuckers?
Speaking of which...
I'll get back to you, Grids. Yes. Oh, hello, motherfuckers.
Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. This is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. Not an official Greens Party podcast. It's produced by Michael the Greek Griffin. I'm Emerald Moon. That's Tom Ballard. And we're doing bonus episode.
Yes, there's an election coming up. You probably heard about this. We did this in 2022. We're going to be profiling Greens candidates leading up to election day. We have amazing candidates all across this country running in seats where they could fucking win. Apparently, if I give them $130,
if you give them $130, anywhere between 130 and 1.3 million is good.
Yeah. Okay, great. And we are kicking off with a fantastic candidate in the seat of Cooper.
Her name is Tara Burnett. We spoke to her about being a trans woman running for politics in the shitfuckery of the political landscape right now. We talked about the Greens policies and our past fuck-ups and what we're going to do now, and whether we can actually win the seat of Cooper. It's a good chat. Oh, and Tom asked her personal questions about her romantic relationship.
It was relevant. It was very relevant. All right, let's do it. Let's talk to Tara.
Just quickly, Caroline, Victorian Greens have pre-selected a teacher and a unionist. Her name is Tara Burnett. She'll run in the seat of Cooper. That's the old Batman. If elected, and the Greens are very competitive in this seat, it's held now by Labor. If she gets up, she will become Australia's first trans MP.
Yeah, she would, and she's made a point of that, and the Greens have as well, when announcing that she's going to run for the seat. And look, it may just work for them. I mean, this is an inner-city Melbourne seat, and if identity politics is going to be successful anywhere in the country, it's inner-city Melbourne, isn't it? But look, the seat's currently held by Labor's Jade Kearney on a margin of 8%. The Greens managed to win seats from Labor in Brisbane in the last election on margins that were greater than that. She's also, Tara Burnett emphasised the fact that she's a renter, and that's going to be a big issue in the electorate as well, especially for the Greens, because they're really pushing Labor on the rental crisis. So 38% of accommodation in the seat is rentals. So that is going to be a big issue, as well as her gender identity, it seems.
Yeah, the trans activists would be desperate to get someone in the federal parliament. We'll watch that closely. Thank you both for the updates.
All right, let's talk to Tara Burnett. Hello, Tara. Welcome to the show.
G'day, I'm Emerald and Tom. Really lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you here. Congratulations on being the Greens candidate for the seat of Cooper. We'll get into the specifics of Cooper and how we're definitely going to win it this year very soon. Tell us a bit about yourself, though. We're profiling candidates here. We're letting people know the fantastic people who are putting their hands up to run in 2025. Who is Tara Burnett?
Yeah, g'day. I am a teacher, a renter, a trade union activist who lives in the seat of Cooper. I've been a Greens member for a hot minute now and kind of been politically active even longer than that. I first joined Young Labor to get rid of Howard.
That's all we have time for. Thanks, Tara. Appreciate it. We'll see you later. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Entirely fair. Yeah. No, I first joined the Labor Party when I was younger to help get rid of Howard, which is probably showing my age. And because, I came from an Irish Catholic family in Tasmania, so Labor was literally the only option as far as my family and the people around me saw it at the time. But Labor's own actions led me to the political wilderness. And then after spending some years in there, the Greens' actions led me to getting involved in the Greens. And so after I've been a member for 13 years now. And so after like a decade plus of helping out volunteering on campaigns with some really amazing candidates, last year I was approached by some people who I really, admire and look up to in the party, who told me that they thought that I would be a good candidate. And after laughing at the first two of them, I started, taking that more seriously and thinking about, what it would mean as someone who is committed to public education, committed to economic justice, committed to First Nations justice, to be able to, have that platform to speak to those things. And as a trans person in an era where we're seeing rising, not just hate, but like active attempts to erase trans people from public life, most publicly in the US, but we're also seeing it in parts of Europe and closer to home, up in Queensland more recently. What that would mean to the queer community to be able to have that platform and to step up, which is why I put my hand up, and thanks to the good members of my branch, they elected me to be the candidate.
Did you have much? Yeah. Did you have I guess fears or reservations about the kind of exposure that you'd be bringing on yourself, particularly as a trans person right now running as a candidate, or did that kind of just make you more determined to do it?
Yeah, both, to be honest. Like I do have those fears, like did before putting my hand up, still do now. The fact that the first news outlet to cover my candidacy was Sky News, and it was with a bunch of like fear-mongering framing around it. Like they did a lot of emphasizing on my work as a teacher to try and rile up, there's perverts around our kids type thing, which was very fun and normal to deal with. But it's what it's meant to the community, like that has made it like really worth it. One of the second pieces of media that I got was The Guardian reached out, who thankfully have not gone down. The Guardian Australia thankfully have not gone down the path that their parent paper in the UK over in Turf Island have. But they interviewed me, and it was a good experience. And the article went live on Sunday, and there was a bit of buzz around. I'm like, hell yeah, that's cool. We got this. But then like I think all the social sharing happened on Monday, and I was at work all Monday. I wasn't checking my candidate email because I was busy teaching. And I get home, and my inbox is just flooded with all of these emails from parents of queer kids and from queer people all over the country. Being like, oh my gosh, I never thought someone would be willing to do this. You don't know what this means to my daughter, things of this nature. And I was just a sobbing wreck that entire night. It was, and I'm like, that's why I'm doing it. It's those kids, like the ones that I have, that I've taught, the ones that I've met, particularly having grown up regional before moving to Narra myself. That's what makes it worth it.
Fuck yeah.
I just got a little shiver.
Yeah, that's great. And thank God, because let's be honest, the most prominent trans woman in this country of late has generally been Kate McGregor, who, you could admire her for a bunch of reasons, but generally has pretty shitty politics. So it's nice to have a left-wing trans woman out there putting their hands up for a fantastic campaign like this. And, I mean, as people have said, and you've said it yourself, if you were to be elected and successful in selection, you would be the first openly trans MP elected to Australian Parliament. Obviously, that's not the entirety of your campaign. You're passionate about lots of different things, but it's clearly going to come up as a fundamental part of who you are and the current climate that we're in.
It's one that, yeah, it's kind of weird because like this whole time I've been like, oh, I don't want to make that the focus of my campaign. It's just like an aspect of who I am, but it's the one that people bring up with me the most often. And thankfully, very quickly, I realized, it's not something I should shy away from because I feel like I'm going to be like, just vote for me because I'm trans, but like the impact that it has for a lot of people has kind of made it worth it to draw attention to that, to bring it up. particularly realizing that in not a dissimilar situation to marriage equality in the mid to late 10s, we kind of don't realize just how ass backwards Australia is on this. Like in Aotearoa in India, they had trans people in parliament in the 90s. Most of Europe, Latin America, Canada throughout the 2000s and the 10s. Even the US has had them at state level for a while and federally last year. Again, we can say things about politics, but like, how is Australia one where like we only have like a couple of local councillors and massive shouts out to them, like shouts out to Erin Maroney, to Jade Darko, who are two amazing trans women who I'm lucky enough to be friends with, who Erin came out while on Campbelltown City Council in Sydney, southwestern Sydney. Jade Darko was elected while being out to Clarence City Council, funnily enough, southeastern Tasmania, where I grew up. And you know, you can make the jokes about Tasmania being tiny, but we did go to school together. But yeah, Australia really do be that ass backwards on this front, and it's time to step up. And if I don't do it, then some, you know, NGO ass Labor or some corporate ass Liberal one will get in, and the trans community doesn't deserve that.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's right. Yes, there's a trans woman who ran for pre-selection in Kooyong for Liberals, right? Yeah, that's right. That didn't work out.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Interesting. But yes, left wing, please. Left wing, please. But I mean, there's the other context, of course, which you can't help but think about it, which is these stories in recent years we've seen in the Victorian Greens in particular, you know, and lots of other places around the country where reporting would have us believe there is an intergenerational stoush. There have been blow-ups within the party in Victoria over the issue of trans rights and how that issue is debated, examined, thought about within the Victorian Greens party. Where is that issue at now? How much did that factor into your consideration when you were putting your hands up to be the Victorian Greens candidate in this particular election? What's the vibe there, would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting. The most times that it's kind of come up is when people outside the party or people with a kind of a media lens on things, such as yourselves, have brought it up, because we really have kind of, I'm not going to say that we've like solved it. Like, it's nothing as certain as that, but like, it does not come up nearly as much as it did even a year ago, let alone 3 years ago at like the peak of all of the kind of the worst of it. It is interesting that you bring up intergeneration, because that is very much how it's been framed, and it very much suited the people who were stirring shit up and the people who had Homer Eugene Legrand V on speed dial to kind of paint it as that, using the same lines that we are now seeing Advance use. Oh, this isn't the party of Bob Brown. It's like, mate, I was a member of the party when Bob Brown was still the leader. You joined like maybe late Richard years. Don't tell me what this party used to be. Just because you're old. Because it really was just a noisy minority all along. Like that was the illusion that that really got shattered, right, once a couple of the kind of, I guess, the whips of that totally not a faction stopped being able to do the activation, do the entries, and so effectively. That really kind of stopped being a thing. It's not completely gone away, but we've taken massive steps, particularly at statewide and at national level. And, you know, having that solidarity from members in other states really helped to push things in Victoria, and to keep a lot of members within Victoria motivated when, you know, they thought that things were going poorly. As for how it factored into my candidacy, it did a little bit. Like, I think that knowing how much of a better place the party is in, and knowing that that is due to the members, right? Taking advantage of the fact that unlike the Labor Party, unlike the Liberal Party, unlike the Victorian Socialists, we really are a completely democratic organisation. We are from the bottom up, grassroots. We are able to affect change, and to, when someone starts, you know, throwing their weight around in a way that is counter to our principles, we are really able to effectively push back against that, thanks to our amazing membership and thanks to the democratic structures that we have in place, no matter how much some of them tried to, you know, stuff about with those structures. But people have really talked to me about it. Like when I was putting my hand up and the pre-selection was ongoing, people were like, yo, I really hope you get this because this would be a really great healing moment for the party to be able to get behind a trans person who represents the party's values and has stood up for them for so long as a member and as a volunteer on other campaigns. And I really hope that it can be that, and that we can then lead that from not only being a healing moment for the few thousand people who are members of the Victorian Greens to a healing moment for the 20-something million Australians.
I love that. I think also, and even beyond the kind of tenure question around how long people have been in the party and whether it's new or old members, like age as well. As you say, it absolutely suits groups like Advance Australia and, mainstream media to be like, it's just a generational divide. And they constantly ignore that, like some of the, I don't know, maybe this is certainly my experience in the Greens anyway, that like some of the staunchest, allies and like the hardest workers in the party are like in their 60s and 70s and like standing alongside young trans and queer people a lot of the time. So I really resent that idea that, it's just like, the youth hate the boomers and the boomers hate the youth, because
absolutely.
That's bullshit.
Also, like, do I really count as youth? I was born in the 80s, babe.
You're like, look, my skincare routine is working, but...
Hey, you're 35, aren't you? We're both 35. We're both very young. We're young, cool kids. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just briefly on this last question on this particular topic before we move on to how we're going to win Cooper and the layouts of the seat. Apart from being a trans woman, you're also running for a party that has like good trans rights and healthcare policies. Can you let the good people at home know exactly what it is that the Greens are fighting for on the front when it comes to trans rights and healthcare? That is obviously a big part of your campaigning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have been the only party that has like stuck with queer rights, stuck with queer issues the whole way through, not just when the community is forced us to it, not just when it's politically convenient, not looking at anyone, particularly any party that I may have used to have been a member of 15, 20 years ago. But it's like looking at our policies, like a lot of it genuinely is around access and around funding, right? I live in Melbourne. I live in the second biggest, or depending on whether you're one of those people who thinks that those like places like Melton and Sunbury, these basically regional towns that are getting swallowed up by the westward spread of Melbourne, and part of it could be by the end of the decade the biggest metro area in the country. And yet I had to wait the better part of a year before I was able to access any sort of gender-affirming healthcare. For anyone in the country, it is so much worse, right? Just like how I can find a bulk billing clinic eventually here, but I was not able to when I lived in Tasmania because there genuinely weren't any, or ones that like only bulk billed for healthcare card or for existing customers type situation. And so having funding to be able to have access to gender-affirming healthcare, to be able to do more informed consent where there's going to be less kind of blocking off of people's access or raising of barriers as we are seeing in Queensland, as we have seen, especially in the UK, is kind of the model that a lot of these reactionaries are taking on this. Being able to improve access, being able to improve funding, being able to put more on the PBS, so that it doesn't become a question of food or hormones for trans people. Because I love my my antihistamines, my estrogen tablets, but I'm going to choose food over them every time. So being able to recognize that, And I hate this thing of like, oh, is it a social issue or is it a class-based issue? Because the vast majority of trans people are working class. The fact that we only see the Caitlyn Jenners of the world is because they're the only ones who can afford access to gender-affirming healthcare, and that's not fair. Everyone deserves access to that.
One of the things I've been thinking about, because I'm in Queensland, and obviously, yes, the LNP have just banned access to puberty blockers and hormones for people under 18 and reversed a decision to fund the Children's Gender Clinic here. And looking at the report that came out, looking at that Children's Gender Clinic, like it's not even just a matter of, providing greater access to one path of gender affirming healthcare. I think what critics of, gender affirming healthcare don't seem to understand or acknowledge is that it's about providing a range of options like you would for any health issue. And so it means that when someone is experiencing gender dysphoria or even just curious, they can go to their doctor and talk about it, and their doctor can go, here's all these options that we can explore, instead of them having that feeling and then they're faced with a brick wall, and they either have to try and like bust through that brick wall, or they're just like, well, fuck this, like I've got no options. And that can lead people down a really fucking dark path, and especially when they're really young. So I think that's just something that I've been thinking about, that it's like, especially, younger people in particular, kids, a lot of the time maybe they don't end up proceeding with, with hormones or whatever it might be, but to be able to have access to just healthcare without it being overlaid with this ideological opposition to anything around gender,
Absolutely. Like, we've already got to deal with the ideological opposition that exists to accessible healthcare in this country, thanks to profit-seeking neoliberal ideology. Why do we got to layer more bloody ideology on top of that? And you're completely right. It is about like having access to that information, having access to this. Like, I always talk about this as, my gender journey, right? Because I'm bloody still ongoing with it. I have friends who have detransitioned for various reasons. One of my friends over in the US has done so out of fear. A few of my friends here, though, have done so because that's where their gender journey is taken. They've realized that actually I'm not like, binary trans, I'm somewhere in between, or this is where my gender is at. And every single one of them is grateful for these gender services because they help with those journeys. Naturally, they're not the ones that are going to get amplified in the right-wing press, but that's because the right-wing press have this bloody-minded ideological hatred of trans people and everything that we represent. So the ones in that small percentage of trans people who do regret, a much smaller percentage than things like, say, knee reconstruction
the
or
knee surgery one,
or pregnancy, But almost all of those people benefit from having better gender-affirming healthcare services.
Yeah. But it also seems to be predicated on a sincere belief, as far as I can tell, from some of these motherfuckers who really think that there is a conspiracy amongst teachers, woke parents, and the trans community to turn as many people trans as possible. They really think that that's like the goal that they're going for, as opposed to saying, providing the healthcare and support for people. For what purpose? For what need? Tara, explain this to me. I demand you explain this to me.
As the woke teacher who is turning your kids to communist Teslas, the aim is I don't know, the overthrow of capitalism. I mean, that's obvious, but you could have guessed that. No, like
no, that's too real. That's too close to true.
Fine, right? It's I don't know.
I don't know. Like maybe it's like you have to be in US brain of like privatized healthcare system. Maybe like it's about the gender doctor industry that they're making money off it somehow, or the WHO, they're making money. I don't know. I don't know what they think, but it's true. It doesn't fucking make sense if you look at it for a second.
Look, I'm kind of over assuming good faith or, that they genuinely believe these arguments based on a lot of the ones that I've heard, right? The grunts in the Facebook comment sections, I do think that most of them do genuinely believe, but the ones who are feeding in their lines, no, they're way more cynical than anybody in this room here. It's funny because every single one of these arguments is recycled, right? Every single one of these ones is one that we heard with the gay panic, a couple of generations ago. It's because, you're letting the gay teachers into school, you're letting gay people onto media, and they're going to convince the kids that they're gay. And now we're just like, oh yeah, kids are gay. Okay, yeah, whatever. Or before then about race mix, or before then about being bloody, right-handed versus left-handed, instead of, having the left-handed writing beaten out of you as would happen at a school a century odd ago. It's letting kids be themselves. And as a teacher who's worked with, hundreds of kids of all genders. That's what's most important, because that's going to help their learning journey, but also just their journey as bloody human beings.
Yeah. Well said. All right, let's chat about the seat of Cooper. Let's get into this. If people outside of Victoria aren't familiar with this particular seat, we're talking about the northern suburbs of Melbourne: Alphington, Bundoora, Clifton Hill, Coburg, Fairfield, Northcote, Preston, made famous from the song To Preston by Courtney Burnett, Reservoir, and Thornbury. Yeah, northern suburbs of Melbourne there. It's kind of the Greens' white whale, I suppose you would say. Alex Batal was a candidate for the Greens for many years, came extremely close to winning that seat. David Feeney was the Labor member. He had to leave Parliament because of the dual citizenship thing. Then you've got Jed Kearney, formerly of the ACTU. She comes in, very popular local member in that, she's a recognisable name and got a lot of cred in that particular part of the world, and she has hung on to it for Labor since then. In 2022, we had Celeste Liddle run for the Greens, did pretty bloody well, got a 6% swing to her in that election, and Jed Kearney had a 5% swing against her on the primary vote there. I guess, yes, that's probably the information to know. Oh, and there's a redistribution coming into 2025. How winnable is this seat, I suppose, Tara? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So Cooper, fantastic area. So if you do not recognise the names of any of those suburbs, even though Tom mispronounced Reservoir, it's a bit of a
Wait, it's not Reservoir? That's so silly.
Yeah. Promise me there are no places in your city that are not pronounced how you would automatically assume.
They're just unpronounceable here.
Yes, Mianjin is
real.
It's all that stuff.
Yeah, they're all names of elder gods from bloody Lovecraft or whatever. Yeah. So it is the northern suburbs. It is the 11 and the 86 lines, the Mernda line. It is the place that has had, a lot of the most iconic songs dedicated to it. Funnily enough, also by Taswegians who have moved there, right? The bedroom philosopher Northcote So Hungover, originally titled North Hobart So Hungover, and Courtney Burnett is also a Taswegian who moved to the northern suburbs. So I feel like I'm stepping in some good footsteps here. This was kind of supposed to be in massive quotation marks, right? Even as far back as when I first joined the party in the early 10s. Supposed to be the next seat to fall, not just in Melbourne, but anywhere in the country after we won Melbourne in 2010. And we ran some really incredible campaigns, 13, 16, just getting ever closer and closer. And then the by-election in 18 happened. There was a bit of a mess internally with that. Labor very effectively pivoted from having taken the seat for granted and using it as a dumping ground for like all of the worst Laborite power brokers, guys like Feeney, who you mentioned, Martin Ferguson, these guys who absolutely nobody liked, but who were very powerful figures and therefore needed their seats in Parliament. They were like, crap, the Greens are going to take this if we don't take it seriously. And they'd already pre-selected Jed Kearney to head off our push for the state seat of Brunswick at the state election in 2018. So this was late 17. They pre-selected and announced her. And then they saw this come up and they're like, shit, we need to stop the Greens from winning this. They're going to win it if we don't do something now. And so they shifted Jed across the river into the candidacy for what was then called Batman. We have since renamed it. Every time I talk to someone outside the country about this, they're just like, oh my God, Batman, are you going to change it back, lol? And like, actually, John Batman was a, genocidal syphilitic shithead, whereas William Cooper, is an absolute king of a black trade union activist. So no chance. So yeah, that by-election didn't go as planned. And then the federal election was the next year, and kind of all the wind had gone out of the sails of us in the local area, local members, campaigners, etc. And our vote kind of fell down. But then Celeste, who is just the absolute best, full disclosure, she is my partner. But I would say that otherwise,
we're going to get
right?
to that, don't you worry.
We dynastic Cooper candidates kind of thing going on.
Look, we met because I fangirled her in a mosh pit, and so like I'm not going to stop fangirling just because we've been together for 8 years. Yeah, she got a massive, massive swing. She got a 6.5% swing at the last election, which was the biggest swing we got anywhere in the state. If we can replicate that, then based on the two-party preferred, we are within less than 2% of winning. And if you look at things like, the government being on the nose because they haven't done nearly enough to address people's real concerns, and they're trying to, hold everything hostage until next term with like, oh yeah, we'll do this next time. Oh, we'll do this, or we'll look into it further down the line, or we're promising full funding for schools, but by 2034, and even voting against their own legislation on eliminating on student debt. Because we introduced it to try and actually get it done instead of, again, trying to hold it hostage. And I think that because Jed, she is someone with really strong left-wing credentials. She is someone who comes from the union movement. She is someone who comes from a very respected profession as a nurse, and as a trade unionist who is active in the years when she was the head of the ACTU. I looked up to a lot of the things that she was doing, and the problem with the Labor Party is that it has probably the most strict binding of MPs of almost any party in the Western world, certainly of any party in the Anglosphere, and that binding is to what the corporate donors want. And it's a lot harder to hide behind, the party's doing this, but I don't personally support this. It's a lot easier to hide behind that when you're in opposition than it is when you're in government and you are having to turn up and vote for these things or come up with excuses to be absent that day so your name doesn't go down next to the bill to cut public housing or the bill to open new coal and gas mines, things of this nature. And so, people in Cooper are realizing that Jed has not been able to affect that change within the party that she promised to, that every left-wing Labor MP kind of has to promise to do in order to head off the Greens. And so hopefully that will lead a few of them to voting for someone who isn't just going to say these things, but is going to put her vote where her mouth is.
Yeah. Well said. I mean, there was this redistribution, right, going into 2025 as well, which has about 5,000 voters in Clifton Hill.
Yep.
From Melbourne that go into the seat, which is very good news for the Greens generally. So that's sort of exciting. That's
Clifton Hill, it's gone in and out of Cooper a few times over the years. It was in 2016, and then it was out in 22, and now it's back in again. It's just one of those weird little edge cases. It is an area that has had Adam as its local member, and so they know the benefits that can be gained from having a Green as your local MP. But it's also an area that, and this kind of speaks to a broader trend, that a lot of Greens voters are kind of getting priced out of, right? Yeah. With the rental crisis, with the cost of living, we know that these days the biggest indicator of whether someone is going to be a Greens voter or not, it's not to do with age or education levels or income or anything like that. It's, are you a renter? It's, are you in this subservient position in the property market that defines how we all live, that defines, like a third of our income. So we're seeing the Greens vote move northwards just because Greens can't afford to live in places like Clifton Hill or the southern part of Northcote anymore. We're going up to places like Reza, like Bundoora, like the bit of Coburg that is part of the seat of Cooper. Most of it is part of Wills, and they get to vote for Sam, but part of it is part of Cooper.
Yeah. All right, we won't get to it longer. We want to keep these episodes tight, but I'm sorry, I have to ask, and to the extent of which you feel comfortable talking about this, Celeste Liddle doesn't need someone else talking to her. She's perfectly capable of doing that herself. But I mean, it is interesting, right? Celeste was our candidate in 2022. Since then, she has left the party basically, and certainly had critiques of the party in relation to the voice referendum. I guess I'm just interested in how you feel about that, how you deal with that as a couple, and where that kind of sits, to the extent that you feel okay discussing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Celeste joined the party because she wanted to achieve certain things. She wanted to light a fire under the arse of both the membership to get us to really fire up, and the ALP to force them to stop taking the seat of Cooper for granted. And because Lydia, who's been a friend and comrade of Celeste for some time, was doing these things as a member of the Greens. Celeste, who had been a supporter of the party in the past, signed up and ran as a candidate. She let her membership lapse with all the stuff that happened with Lydia, with The Voice, also with some local members who had been, a bit garbage and racist, and thankfully have been kicked out of the party since for being garbage and racist. Yeah, like the Voice referendum, like it's the kind of thing that makes me really grumpy at the limits to the imagination of political liberalism, right? Here is this thing that was set up by the government that like, oh yeah, we've had a bunch of voices before that weren't listened to, but maybe if we put this one in the Constitution, we'll listen to it, either not knowing or not caring that would make Black people a political football to be kicked around by the hard right in this country and by their allies in the mainstream media of this country for the entire length of the campaign. And then because they didn't have strong legislative arguments, they decided to the government, the ALP decided to frame this whole thing around, this isn't just a vote for a line in the Constitution about establishing an advisory body. This is about, Black people's rights and how much we value them as a country, which just made it all the worse when, the right-wing parties and the right-wing media succeeded in shutting down that referendum and just running it into the ground for no gain. It left Celeste and a lot of First Nations people in this country really devastated by the whole experience. I don't at all blame her for being a bit of a salty Pringle about that, and we kind of did get wedged by the Labor Party on that. We couldn't really, or our federal representatives, minus of course Lydia, didn't feel like they could stand up to the ALP in the way that the issue was being framed and demand more and better for First Nations people within the context. And Lydia and a lot of her allies, a lot of First Nations members felt like they could not support the party, just kind of accepting the framing that the ALP was putting on this. I very much sympathise with both positions. It's a really tough position to be in. And, the ALP knew that. And that's why they were like, putting more comms into saying, the Greens aren't doing anything to support The Voice than they were into supporting The Voice.
Yes.
It's one of those sad things where we will never really know what would have happened if we'd reached for something better, if we had gone for something better, because we tried the half-ass thing, well, we being the Labor government and a lot of the progressive left too, and failed. And that's then taken as a reason to not try for anything bigger or better. That's just one example of many where it's that frustrating thing where you're like, the failure of centrism or like a watered down proposal does not mean that the whole thing would be a failure. But anyway.
Yeah, well, tell that to the people who are still saying that that us shutting down the CPRS 16 years ago is the reason why things are so bad environmentally. But that was a different situation because it wasn't just us, it was the environmental NGOs saying, yeah, we need and deserve better. Right, came in promising better. Can we have better, please? That allowed us to force their hand and to get something much better, just 2 years later. But, a decade of Liberal government and the ALP deciding very much to kind of shit on their own legacy in a lot of ways meant that there wasn't that confidence in civil society, in NGOs, in union groups to be able to push back against that narrative with this. And so, yeah, it's a really frustrating way that it's all worked out.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to finish on that note.
but you're doing good shit, and Celeste is still doing good shit, and
and we love
we're all
Celeste,
trying our best.
We love you. We love everyone. We love Cooper. We want Jen Kearney to not win, etc., etc. How can people get involved? How can they help you get elected, Tara Burnett? Let us know what's going on in Cooper.
Well, as everybody listening to this podcast, and certainly you two would know, a party that does not take corporate donations. And so we, especially in areas where the can does not have, this massive network of rich mates, almost all of my friends are like, teachers and nurses with no spare cash, or just like working class punks with no money to spare. We are running on some real oily rag areas here. So if you live in Melbourne, particularly if you live anywhere around the northern suburbs and would like to help out, we are running door knocks. We are running community calling nights. We are running data nights. You can sign up to any one of those through the events tab. It is on the link tree that I will pass on to the lovely Emma and Tom to put in the show notes. If you do not live nearby, but you still want to support, you can donate. We're trying to raise some funds to go and get a billboard in that newly added area of Cooper in Clifton Hill. We're also running a fundraiser right now with the incredible Sam Wallman. Many of you might know Sam Wallman. If you have seen any left-wing trade union stuff, a lot of stuff from First Nations activism, from Palestine activism. He has
Serious
been
Danger merchandise.
Serious Danger merchandise. Yes. He has been the go-to guy for so much of the activists, and especially
he's really cornered the fucking
union
market, hasn't he? He's a genius.
He truly has.
It's like not just in Australia, but like internationally. Like my Seppo mates have heard of this guy and have seen his art in books. It rules. And so he has done a piece of art, which is like a bloody tremendous honor. It's one of the most holy shit, this is a real thing, ask things that has happened in this campaign. We are selling prints. We are selling, if you live in the area, framed prints. If you don't live in the area, I'm sorry, we won't sell you a framed print because we don't want to send a frame through the mail. And we are selling some tea towels, which I think would go very lovely next to your John Kudelka rusted on bingo tea towel. Certainly, that's where I'm going to put mine.
Nice.
I'm going to have a look now.
Please do.
I could use a new tea towel. Yeah.
Please do.
Sounds tasty. We will put all those links in the show notes for this episode.
Thank you so much.
Hey, no worries, Tara. Thank you so much for running. Thank you for being you. Thank you for talking to us for this show. Best of luck. We are gunning for you for the Greens to take Cooper in 2025. And keep listening to the show, because we are going to bring you more of these profile episodes with the fantastic people across the country who are running for the Greens. Thank you, Tara. Solidarity, comrade. Cheers.
Thanks, Tara.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Serious danger to Australia.